I'm Robert Miller, 62 years old, and I thought New Year's Eve would just be another quiet night with the TV on and a glass of ginger ale. But a single mistake changed everything. My daughter sent me a 3-minute audio that wasn't meant for me, and in it I heard words no father should ever hear. In one breath, she erased me from her life and laid out a plan to take the only thing I had left. That night, I sat frozen, but by morning, I knew I had to act. What I uncovered after that will make you wonder how well you truly know the ones you love. The cold from the window glass pressed against my palm as I sat alone in my living room on New Year's Eve. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing. Outside, I could see flashes of fireworks already lighting up the winter sky over Columbus, and in the distance, neighbors were laughing, gathering with their families. Inside my own walls, I felt like the last man in the world. I had turned the television on low, the countdown show flickering with smiling hosts and glittering lights. I was not really watching. I had poured myself a glass of ginger ale, not champagne, because drinking alone never felt right to me. The clock on the mantel showed 11:46 p.m. I leaned back in my chair, trying to convince myself that this would be just another night I would get through. Then my phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up without thinking. A new message. It was an audio recording. From Emily, my daughter. For a moment, my chest lifted, thinking she might be reaching out to wish me Happy New Year. I tapped play. Her voice filled the room, too casual, too sharp. She was talking to David, her husband. My heart froze when I realized it had not been meant for me at all. She said she was tired of waiting, that it was time to put me into that nursing home in Groveport, the cheap one that charges $900 a month. She told him she was going to finalize the paperwork so the house on Oakwood Drive would finally be in their names. My house. The home I had built with my own hands, paid for through 40 years of crawling through attics, wiring outlets, working overtime shifts until my knees gave out. David's muffled voice came through, agreeing, asking when it would happen. Emily laughed, that quick laugh of hers that used to make me smile when she was a little girl. She said the sooner the better, that once it was done, I would be out of their lives for good. I sat there, gripping the phone, unable to breathe. The fireworks outside boomed louder, but all I heard was that recording looping in my head. I replayed it once, twice, my thumb shaking on the screen. Every word stabbed deeper than the last. I whispered her name out loud, Emily, as if saying it could change what I had just heard. But the voice in the message was cold, practical, like I was nothing more than an obstacle. My body felt heavy. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the floorboards I had sanded myself years ago. Images ran through my mind. Emily at 5 years old, wearing her first winter coat. Emily at 16, blowing out candles on a cake I had worked extra hours to afford Emily in her cap and gown at Ohio State, smiling wide, because I had somehow kept the mortgage paid while covering her tuition. And now she was planning to erase me from her life like I was a stain on the wall. The TV roared with the countdown. 10, 9, 8. The hosts shouted, and confetti rained down on the screen. Outside, my neighbors yelled, "Happy New Year," with champagne glasses raised high. I sat alone, clutching the phone, listening to the sound of my own daughter's betrayal echoing through my chest. The clock struck midnight. Fireworks exploded over Columbus, red and gold across the sky. My window pane rattled with each blast. I could smell faint smoke drifting in through the cracks. My phone slipped from my hand onto the carpet, still glowing with her name. I could not move. My heart beat so hard it hurt. The words repeated in my ears over and over. Nursing home. Transfer the house. Out of our lives. Happy New Year, the world shouted. My world ended with the sound of her voice. I closed my eyes, hands trembling, and for the first time in my life, I wished the night would just stop, freeze in place. because I did not know what came next. The first light crept across the blinds, and I pulled myself up from the chair. My body ached as if I had been carrying bricks all night. I shuffled into the kitchen, poured water into the old kettle, and set it on the burner. The sound of the flame clicking on steadied me. I gripped the counter, told myself I still had ground to stand on, and forced down the lump in my throat. While the water heated, my eyes fell on the row of framed photographs that lined the hallway wall. Emily's face was in nearly every one. Her kindergarten portrait, with that crooked smile missing a front tooth. Her high school picture hair curled just the way she begged me to pay for. The snapshot of her standing outside Ohio State with her acceptance letter. I traced each memory with my eyes, and the sting of betrayal came back sharp. I thought of the message I had heard only hours before, and the laughter at the end. Steam hissed from the kettle. I made my coffee and sat at the table where so much of our life had been decided. I could almost see her sitting across from me at 10 years old, asking why other kids had nicer backpacks. I remembered saying, "We make do, Em, and someday you'll have everything you dream of." The past came like a flood. I saw myself as a younger man, 27, clutching her tiny hand outside a duplex on the south side of Columbus. Her mother had left the year before, and all I had was my daughter and a job wiring houses for whatever contractor would take me. I worked long hours, came home with boots full of drywall dust, and still found enough energy to warm a bottle or braid her hair in clumsy lines. Nights were the hardest. She would cry for her mom, and I would sit by her bed telling stories I made up just to keep her calm. When she was 6, I bought her a pair of bright red shoes, even though the cheaper ones would have fit just as well. I worked 2 Saturday shifts to cover the cost, but watching her walk into school tapping proudly down the hallway was worth it. At 16, she wanted a sweet 16 party. I took side jobs installing ceiling fans and patching circuits until I had saved enough. We rented the community hall, strung up white lights, and bought a cake big enough for everyone. She told me that night I always did too much. I told her a father does what the day requires. College was the steepest hill. Tuition at Ohio State was more than I earned in months. I took out a loan against this very house, the house I built piece by piece just so she could stand in those lecture halls. I worked overtime, ate canned soup for weeks, and smiled when she called saying she needed money for books or gas. The day she graduated, I sat in the stands and watched her walk across the stage, and I swore it was the proudest moment of my life. She hugged me after and whispered she would take care of me now. I sipped my coffee and stared at the table's worn edges. Those words felt like a cruel joke now. Instead of care, she planned to sell me off to strangers, to take the house that had been the anchor of our lives. I pressed my palms together and let the silence of the kitchen press back against me. My thoughts drifted to the early years of her marriage to David. They came every Sunday for dinner, bringing a bottle of wine and laughter. We shared pot roast mashed potatoes and stories. David helped me carry out the trash. Emily washed dishes beside me. I believed then that we were still a family. Slowly, the visits stopped. The phone calls grew short. Excuses piled up. Then came the comments about my memory, little jabs wrapped in concern. "Are you sure you can manage the bills, Dad? Maybe it's better if we handle them for you." I brushed it off as stress. I never imagined it was the start of a plan. I stood and poured the cold coffee down the sink. The air smelled faintly of smoke from leftover fireworks outside. I opened the window and let in the sharp January chill. My chest tightened. How had the girl I raised, the one I sacrificed everything for, turned into the voice I heard plotting my end? I walked back to the hallway and stopped at the photo of Emily in her graduation gown. My hand rested on the frame. For a moment, I wanted to believe the girl in the picture still lived somewhere inside her, that maybe she could not have meant what she said. But the message had been clear. Her laughter too real. The clock on the mantel struck 8. I took a shower dressed in clean jeans and a flannel and laced up my boots. I needed to keep moving. Standing still would drown me. I drove out to the small diner on Main Street where I had been going for years. Nora, the waitress, brought me black coffee and eggs. She asked if I had celebrated last night. I told her no, not this year. She patted my hand and left me to my plate. All around me, families sat together, parents and children laughing about resolutions and plans. The sound cut through me. I finished my breakfast, quickly paid the check, and drove back home. The house stood quiet, waiting. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and listened to the creak of the floorboards. This place had been my life's work, my shelter, my gift to Emily. And now, it was the prize she and David wanted to steal. I sat down in my chair by the window, staring at the bare branches in the yard, and felt the weight settle on me. I did not know yet what I would do, but I knew one thing. I could not stay frozen. Somewhere inside the pain, a small spark of resolve was beginning to burn. I drove back roads for nearly an hour that afternoon, past frozen fields and bare trees, letting the hum of the engine drown out the noise in my head. The sky was gray, low, and heavy, the kind that made you feel like the world was pressing down on you. At one point, I pulled over near the Scioto River, killed the engine, and sat staring at the water as it moved slow and brown under the thin sheet of ice. I remembered the first time Emily asked me for a loan. It was about 3 years ago, right after David lost his job at the plant in Westerville. She came to the house with that worried look she used to wear as a child when she wanted to confess breaking something. She said they were behind on the mortgage and asked if I could lend them $1,000 to keep the bank off their backs. I did not hesitate. I went straight to the drawer where I kept the emergency savings and handed her the cash. She hugged me tight and promised it would only be this once. But it was not once. 2 months later, it was $2,500 for a down payment on a new car, then $3,000 for credit card bills that had piled up. Each time I convinced myself it was just a rough patch, that my daughter needed me the way she always had. I cut back on groceries, skipped replacing the roof when it leaked, told myself beans and cornbread were fine suppers. She said thank you, less and less. The first real crack came one Sunday when I drove to their house unannounced with a pineapple upside-down cake, David's favorite. I knocked for 5 minutes before they opened the door. Faces flushed, papers spread across the kitchen table. Carolyn, her cousin who worked at the county office, was there too. She stuffed a stack of documents into a folder the moment she saw me. Emily smiled too wide and said they were just sorting out some health insurance paperwork for David. I wanted to believe it. I even let it go when I glimpsed my own name typed across the top of a page. Later came the talk about my memory. Emily called one evening and said David had noticed I seemed forgetful lately. She asked if I had ever considered how dangerous it could be for me to live alone in a big house. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but I caught the sharp edge underneath. I laughed nervously, brushed it off, and tried to change the subject. She changed it too, almost too quickly. Not long after, strangers began knocking on my door. A nurse with a clipboard said she was there to check my blood pressure. A man who introduced himself as a geriatric care specialist asked if I ever felt confused or unsafe. They all said Emily had scheduled the visits. I let them in at first, thinking it was some kind of community service. Then one day, I overheard one of them in the living room, telling Emily he would note signs of mild confusion in his report. I was standing right in the kitchen, perfectly aware of every word, and felt the floor tilt under me. The memory of that conversation sat heavy in my chest as I stared out at the river. I started the truck again and drove toward town, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. Their plan had not started yesterday. It had been slowly unfolding for months, maybe years. The excuses, the paperwork, the visits, all building towards something I had not seen until it was almost too late. Back at the house, I walked into the kitchen, dropped my keys on the counter, and looked around as if the walls might whisper back the truth. I noticed small changes I had ignored before. Bills stacked neatly in a folder labeled in Emily's handwriting. My checkbook moved from the desk to the kitchen drawer. Even the electric bill already half filled out with her writing. She had been slipping her hands into my life piece by piece, smiling while she did it. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the hutch where I kept my important papers. The folder with the deed to the house was still there, but the envelope looked disturbed, not the way I had left it. I took it out and spread the pages across the table. My name was there in black ink. Robert Miller, owner of 124 Oakwood Drive, Fair and Square. But a sick feeling told me she and Carolyn already had copies, maybe even altered versions. I sat back in the chair and rubbed my temples. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. This was the same daughter I had carried on my shoulders at the county fair, the same one I had worked double shifts to send to school, the same one who once told me I was her hero. Now she wanted me out of the way so she could sell the only thing I had left. The phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me out of my thoughts. A message from Emily. "Dad, hope you're okay. We might stop by later to check on you." My thumb hovered over the screen, then I set it down without replying. I walked outside, the cold air biting at my face. The yard was bare, the maple tree branches like dark veins against the sky. I stood there staring at the house, at the bricks. I had laid the porch, I had rebuilt the roof, I had patched a dozen times. Every inch carried my sweat, my hours, my life. The thought of losing it to the people I trusted most made my jaw tighten. Inside again, I lit the small lamp in the living room and sat down, elbows on my knees. The betrayal hurt, but underneath it, something else was forming, solid and sharp. They thought I was too old, too tired, too confused to see the truth. They thought they could write me off like a broken appliance. But I had built this life one nail, one paycheck, one sacrifice at a time. I looked at the clock. The hands pointed to 9:30. The house creaked with the sound of settling wood. I leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, letting the silence fill me. For the first time since hearing that message, I felt something other than despair. It was not much, but it was enough to keep me breathing. A thin, steady flame that whispered one promise. I was not finished yet. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm. My hands no longer shook the way they had on New Year's Eve. I showered, shaved, and put on my best shirt, the blue one Emily had once said made me look younger. I tucked the deed, my bank papers, and every bit of identification I owned into a worn leather folder. If my daughter thought I was too blind to see what she was doing, she was about to learn otherwise. I drove straight into downtown Columbus and parked outside the First Federal Branch where I had banked for 30 years. The lobby was warm, the smell of polished wood and fresh coffee greeting me. Nora, the branch manager, spotted me right away. She had known me since the days I came in with Emily holding my hand. "Robert," she said, "what brings you in so early?" I leaned on her desk, lowering my voice. "Nora, I need to see every transaction from my accounts for the last 6 months. And I want to know if anyone has been requesting information in my name." Her smile faltered. "Give me a moment." She tapped at her keyboard, the screen glowing against her glasses. Then she frowned. "Mr. Miller, it looks like there were several inquiries from your daughter." She presented a signed authorization form. "She said you gave her permission." My stomach twisted as she slid the paper across to me. The signature was close to mine, but tilted wrong in a way only I would notice. I shook my head. "That is not my hand. I never signed this." Nora's face hardened. "Forged signatures are serious." She printed the documents and handed them to me. "Do you want to put a block on your accounts?" I nodded. "Lock everything. New passwords, no access but mine. And move my savings into a new account under my control only." For an hour, we worked through it all. By the time I left, every dollar was safe, and Emily's name was nowhere near my accounts. Walking back to the truck, the cold air hit my face like a wake-up call. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was holding the reins. My next stop was the county clerk's office. The building smelled of paper and dust. I knew Carolyn worked there, and if she was helping Emily, I needed to see it for myself. I walked through the metal detector, my folder tucked tight under my arm, and asked the receptionist to direct me to property records. Carolyn's face drained of color the moment she saw me at her counter. "Uncle Robert," she stammered. "I didn't expect you." I set my folder down and kept my tone light. "Carolyn, I just want to check on my house records. You know, peace of mind." Her hands trembled as she pulled out a stack of files. Papers shifted and I glimpsed something with my name typed across the top. She tried to slide it into a drawer, but I reached out and caught it. It was a transfer form, half filled with my name, scratched into the owner line, and Emily and David's names written below as successors. My jaw tightened. "Carolyn, this is my property. Why are there documents with my name on them in your drawer?" She broke just like that. Tears filled her eyes. "Uncle Robert, I'm sorry. Emily told me you weren't well. She said you needed help, that it was for your own good. She promised me some money if I helped with the paperwork." I slid the form back into the folder and leaned closer. "Carolyn, listen to me carefully. I know about the forgery at the bank. I know about the evaluations they tried to use against me. And now I know about this. You can either help me clean this up, or I walk straight to your supervisor with what I have." Her hands covered her face. "Please don't ruin me. I have children to feed." "Then do the right thing," I said. "Nullify anything with my name on it. And give me copies of every single document they filed." For 2 hours she worked printing, signing, stamping. I walked out with a stack of evidence thick enough to crush any plan Emily thought she had. By the time I got back home, the January sky was darkening again. I sat at the kitchen table spreading the documents out in front of me. Forged bank authorizations, draft property transfers, even a copy of a fabricated medical report claiming I showed early signs of dementia. My chest burned with rage, but beneath it all was a cold satisfaction. They had left a trail and I was holding it in my hands. I made myself a simple dinner-heated stew from the freezer and ate slowly while the papers stared back at me. The clock ticked steady. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. When the dishes were washed, I gathered every page back into the folder and set it on the chair beside me. Tomorrow I would call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who knew how to fight back. Tonight I let myself sit in the quiet of my own home, knowing that for the first time since Emily's message, I was no longer cornered. The silence was heavy, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of proof, with the first outlines of a plan I could feel taking shape. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the sound of the wind remind me that the storm had only just begun. The next morning, I woke with a clear head and a list forming in my mind before my feet even touched the floor. I brewed coffee, packed the folder of evidence into my satchel, and stood at the mirror long enough to button my shirt straight. My reflection looked older than I remembered, lines etched deep, but there was steel in my eyes I had not seen in years. By 9, I was walking into the offices of Harrison Ford, an attorney known across Franklin County for dealing with fraud and property disputes. The receptionist looked up as I stepped through the glass doors. I told her my name, and she ushered me into a waiting room that smelled faintly of leather and paper. When Mr. Ford entered, he offered a hand that was firm, but not rushed. He was in his early 60s, sharp gray suit glasses balanced on his nose. "What can I do for you today, Mr. Miller?" I set the folder on his desk and opened it, page after page, spreading out between us. Forged bank authorization, draft property transfers, a medical evaluation full of lies. And then I told him about the audio message from Emily, every word carved into my memory. He listened without interruption, his brows knitting tighter the further I went. When I finished, he tapped the stack of documents. "This is strong evidence. We are talking about fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft of property. If you want, we can file both civil and criminal actions." I leaned forward. "I do not just want the house protected. I want them to face consequences. I want them to understand that they cannot do this to me or to anyone else." He nodded slowly. "Then we start by securing your assets. We will also prepare a restraining order to keep them from trying to move you against your will. And Mr. Miller, we will gather more evidence. One message and forged signatures are powerful, but we want this case to be airtight." Hearing him say it out loud sent a chill down my spine. It was real now, not just fear in my head. He pulled out a legal pad, asking dates, names, and details. I gave him everything from the first loan Emily asked for to the night strangers came into my house pretending to be medical staff. When I left his office 2 hours later, I carried copies of affidavits ready to sign and a list of steps we would take in the coming week. The winter sun was bright, bouncing off the glass of downtown buildings. For the first time in days, I breathed easier. Back home, I found myself restless. I walked the rooms, touching the walls, the worn wood of the banister, the photographs of Emily through the years. Each frame felt heavier now, not with pride, but with the knowledge of how far she had drifted. Late that afternoon, the phone rang. It was her. "Dad," she said brightly, "are you doing okay?" I paused, listening to the false sweetness in her voice. "I'm fine, Emily. Just busy. Busy with what, Dad? You know you can always call if you need help." Her words carried a sharp edge now that I could finally hear clearly. "Help." That was her cover. I kept my tone even. "Thank you, but I have everything under control." A beat of silence, then she spoke quickly. "Carolyn might stop by later just to drop off some papers." My jaw tightened. "No, Emily. No one comes here without my say-so." There was another pause, then a strained laugh. "All right, Dad. Just looking out for you." When the line went dead, I sat for a long time in the silence of the kitchen, staring at the phone on the counter. They knew something was shifting. My refusal had unsettled her. That gave me a small, grim satisfaction. That evening, I drove to see my old neighbor, Rose. She had lived 2 houses down for 40 years and had seen more than she ever let on. She welcomed me and poured tea and asked how I was holding up. I hesitated, then told her part of the story. Not all, but enough. She listened quietly, her face a mix of sorrow and anger. "Robert," she said, "I've overheard things. Emily and David talking outside last fall, thinking no one was around. They mentioned moving you out soon. I didn't understand it then, but now I do." Her words landed heavy, but also gave me another piece of the puzzle. I asked if she would be willing to speak to my attorney if needed. She nodded without hesitation. By the time I returned home, night had settled in. I pulled into the driveway and sat with the engine off, watching the porch light glow against the siding. My house, my life stood quiet, but I could feel the war building just beneath its walls. I carried the satchel inside, set it on the table, and opened the folder again. The papers whispered one truth back at me. I was no longer a victim waiting to be erased. I was a man preparing for battle, and the first moves had already been made. The house creaked in the cold, the wind pressed against the windows, and I felt a strange steadiness take hold. This was only the beginning. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready. The next day started before sunrise. I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow pad, writing down every date, every strange visit, every loan I had given Emily and David. My handwriting looked rough in the dim light, but each line steadied me. When I finished, I tucked the notes into my satchel beside the folder of documents. I had an appointment with Mr. Fauchard, Mr. Ford's paralegal, that morning, and I wanted to be ready. On the way downtown, I stopped for gas. As I stood by the pump, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily. "Morning, Dad. Hope you're doing well. David and I were thinking maybe you should come spend a few days with us. We can help you get organized for the new year." I stared at the screen until the numbers on the pump clicked past $30. Organized. That was their word for removing me from my own house. I slipped the phone back in my pocket without replying and finished fueling the truck. At the office, a young woman named Claire met me in the lobby. She was sharp-eyed, quick, and she guided me into a conference room with walls lined in books. She spread out the documents I had brought, organizing them into neat stacks. As I told my story again, she typed notes with quick strokes, pausing only to ask a clarifying question. Mr. Ford joined us halfway through. He glanced at the documents, then looked at me. "We will move fast, Robert. First step is to file a protective order on your property. Second step, initiate an investigation into the forged signatures. And we will be ready in case they attempt to pressure you further." I signed where he pointed initials and full name over and over. When we finished, he looked me in the eye. "You need allies outside this office too. People who can back your story if they try to paint you as confused." I thought of Rose, of her willingness to testify. I told him about her, and he nodded. "Good. Anyone else, neighbors, co-workers, even your doctor?" The word doctor made my jaw tighten. I had not had a full exam in years, but I knew I needed one now. Proof of my sound mind would matter. I told him I would schedule it that week. By the time I left the office, the city streets were buzzing. Cars honked, people hurried across crosswalks, the world moving on as if my life were not sitting on a knife edge. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel. That evening, Emily called again. This time I answered. "Dad," she said, her voice warm but practiced. "David and I have been talking. We really think it would be best if you came to stay with us for a while." I took a breath. "Emily, I appreciate your concern, but I am fine here. I am not leaving my home." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Dad, you don't see it. This house is too much for you. You forget things. You miss bills. What if something happens?" Her words cut, but I kept my voice even. "I have lived in this house for over 30 years. I built my life here. And I am not helpless." The sweetness dropped from her tone. "You're being stubborn. We are only trying to help." "Help is one thing," I said. "Taking over my life is another." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then she muttered something under her breath, too low to catch, and hung up. I set the phone down and sat in the quiet. My chest hurt not just from anger, but from the grief of realizing the gap between us was now a canyon. Still under the grief was a calm resolve. I had faced harder battles than this. 2 days later, I went to see Dr. Patterson, my longtime physician. He greeted me with his usual firm handshake. "Robert, good to see you." "What brings you in today?" I explained carefully about the evaluations Emily had arranged about the claims she was making. His eyes narrowed. "That doesn't sound right. Let's run a full cognitive test." For an hour, I answered questions, repeated lists, drew shapes, solved little puzzles. He watched closely, jotting notes. At the end, he smiled faintly. "Robert, you're sharp as ever. There's no sign of impairment. I will put that in writing." Relief washed over me. He printed the report, signed it, and handed it to me. I folded it carefully into my folder. Another stone on my side of the scale. Back at home, I noticed David's truck parked 2 streets over. I slowed, watching as he sat behind the wheel, pretending to check his phone. My chest tightened. They were watching me now. I pulled into my driveway, got out slowly, and looked right at him. Even from a distance, I saw the flicker in his eyes before he started the engine and drove off. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the tick of the mantel clock. The papers lay spread in front of me, the report from Dr. Patterson on top. Outside, the wind rattled the branches of the maple tree. The fight was no longer just about holding on to my house. It was about my dignity, my life, my name. I knew the road ahead would get darker, but as I sat there in the dim light of my kitchen, I felt the ground solid under my feet. Night fell slowly, shadows stretching across the floor. I gathered the papers into the folder and placed it beside my chair. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I let the silence of the house wrap around me, steady and familiar, like an old friend waiting in the dark. The morning light came with a sharp edge cutting through the blinds and waking me before the alarm on the mantel clock chimed. I pulled myself out of bed, the floor cold under my feet, and moved through the house with the quiet certainty of a man preparing for a long day. I brewed coffee, scribbled a few notes on the yellow pad, and slipped the folder of documents into my satchel. By mid-morning, I was standing on Rose's porch, knocking gently on the screen door. She opened it with her usual smile, though her eyes searched my face with worry. "Robert, you look like you haven't slept." I gave her a small nod. "Sleep isn't what it used to be, but I'll manage." "Can we talk?" She led me inside, the smell of cinnamon and old wood wrapping around us. We sat at her kitchen table, a plate of cookies between us. I told her about the lawyer, about the bank, about Dr. Patterson's report. Her hands tightened around her mug as she listened. "Robert, I will stand by you. If they try to twist things, I'll tell anyone what I heard that night outside." Emily and David were plotting clear as day. Her words steadied me more than the coffee. Having someone else who had seen the cracks gave me strength. I thanked her, promised her attorney Ford would likely call, and she pressed my hand before I left. Driving back through the neighborhood, I saw David's truck again, parked too far from their own driveway to be casual. This time he wasn't pretending to scroll his phone. He was watching my house. I slowed as I passed, and when his eyes met mine, there was no attempt to hide it. I parked in my driveway, cut the engine, and sat behind the wheel until he finally pulled away. Inside the house, I called Mr. Ford. I told him about David's truck. He listened carefully, then said we might need to request a no-contact order if the intimidation continued. "Write down every incident, Robert. Dates, times, even the weather. A record can make the difference." That afternoon, the phone rang. Emily again. "Dad, David said he saw you talking to Rose. Why are you dragging neighbors into private family matters?" I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "Emily, you and David made this public the moment you forged my signature and plotted to steal my house. I am not hiding anymore." Her voice sharpened. "You're making a mistake. Lawyers will drain you, Dad. Why not just let us handle things?" I felt heat rise in my chest. "Because it is my life, Emily. My house, my name. And I won't hand it over." Her breath hissed through the line before she hung up. The silence that followed felt louder than her words. Later, as dusk fell, I walked through each room of the house, touching the walls, the banister, the photographs. I paused in the living room, where Emily used to lie on the rug with her coloring books, where Daisy the dog had curled by the fireplace. The memories hurt, but they also reminded me of why I was fighting. I fixed a simple supper, warmed leftover stew, and ate while the clock ticked steady on the mantel. After washing the dishes, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the satchel once more. I laid out the forged bank authorization, the draft property transfers, the false medical report, and now the note from Dr. Patterson declaring me sound of mind. Each page was a weapon, each signature a shield. I thought back to my younger years, working double shifts, scraping together enough to give Emily everything she asked for. Those nights soldering wires in basements until my back screamed, only to come home and rock her to sleep. I had built this house, brick by brick, memory by memory. To have her now try to erase me from it was more than betrayal. It was war. The phone buzzed again, just as I was gathering the papers. This time it was a message from David. "Be careful, old man. Some battles aren't worth the pain." I stared at the words until my vision blurred, then set the phone down without replying. I walked to the front door, locked both bolts, and drew the curtains tight. The house creaked in the cold, and I sat back down at the table, the folder of evidence beside me. The fight ahead was going to be long, but I was not alone anymore. I had Rose, I had Ford, I had the truth in black and white. The night settled in heavy and still. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the lamp by my chair. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the old clock tick against the quiet, steady as a heartbeat, marking the hours until morning. Morning brought a knock at my door. It was not loud, more like a polite tapping, but it sent a jolt through me all the same. I opened it to find a man in a navy jacket holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as Officer Daniels from Columbus PD. Behind him stood a woman in a gray blazer, hair pulled back tight. She said she was from Adult Protective Services. "Mr. Miller, we've received reports that you may be unable to care for yourself," the officer began. "We'd like to ask you a few questions and look around to be sure you're safe." The words hit like ice water. I stepped back but kept my voice steady. "Who made this report?" The woman shifted her clipboard. "Your daughter Emily Miller expressed concern. She said you may be forgetting things, missing bills, and at risk of harm." My chest burned. I forced myself to breathe evenly. "Come in," I said, and led them to the kitchen. The officer looked around, noting the neat counter, the stacked dishes drying by the sink, the folder on the table. The woman asked questions, gentle but pointed. Did I remember the date? Could I name the current president? Could I tell her the medications I take? I answered each without hesitation, watching her pen move across the page. When she finished, I opened the folder and slid Dr. Patterson's report across the table. This was done 2 days ago. My physician of 20 years confirmed I'm fully sound. She read quickly, then glanced at the officer. He studied me a moment, then nodded. "Mr. Miller, your home is in order. Your answers are sharp, and this report speaks clearly. We will be closing this file." Relief washed over me, but anger boiled beneath it. They tried to paint me incompetent. They tried to open the door to have me taken from my home. As the two of them left, the officer paused at the door. "Sir, I see this happen more often than you'd think. Families sometimes push too hard. Keep your record safe." After they drove away, I sat at the table gripping the edges until my knuckles went white. Emily had escalated. If the police and APS had believed her story, I could have been carried out of my house today. I called Mr. Ford immediately. He listened without surprise. "They are pressing harder, Robert. But you handled it well. That report saved you. We'll use this incident to strengthen your case. Document it in detail." I wrote it all down, every word, every look, even the color of the blazer the woman wore. Then I folded the notes into the folder. That afternoon, Rose came by with a casserole dish. She had seen the patrol car outside and wanted to be sure I was all right. When I told her what happened, she shook her head, eyes sharp with anger. "They will not get away with this, Robert. If you need me to testify, I'll be there." Her loyalty steadied me. I walked her back to the porch, thanked her, and stood watching as she crossed her yard. Hours later, just as the sky was turning orange, David pulled up in his truck. He walked up my driveway like he owned the ground. His smile was thin, his eyes colder than I had ever seen. "Evening, Robert," he said. "Thought I'd check in. Heard you had visitors today." I folded my arms. "Yes, and they left satisfied. I'm fine." He tilted his head, smirk tugging at his lips. You could save everyone a lot of trouble if you just let Emily take over. This house, the bills, all of it. You don't need the burden. My jaw tightened. David, I raised that girl alone. I built this house with my own 2 hands, and I am not stepping aside. His eyes narrowed. You're making this harder than it has to be. I stepped closer until we were almost nose to nose. Get off my property. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he gave a low laugh, turned, and walked back to his truck. The engine roared, and he sped off down the street. The silence after he left was thick. I stood in the driveway, the cold air stinging my face, and knew the storm had fully broken now. They would not stop. Inside, I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and sat with the folder again. Each page felt heavier, each note more vital. The battle was no longer coming. It was here, pressing at the walls of my home. Night fell with the sound of wind against the siding. I sat at the table, the clock ticking steady, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me. And in that quiet, I felt the flame inside me burn hotter, a steady reminder that I was not beaten yet. The following morning, I drove to Mr. Ford's office with the folder riding shotgun on the seat beside me. My hands gripped the wheel tight, as if the papers could slip away if I let them. The city was waking up, buses sighing at stops, people bundled in coats against the January wind. I pulled into the garage, walked briskly across the lobby, and rode the elevator up to the 6th floor, where his practice sat. Claire greeted me with a smile, but her eyes looked serious. Mr. Ford is expecting you. She led me into the conference room, where he was already waiting, sleeves rolled up, files stacked in front of him. Robert, he said, you handled yourself well with the police. That report from Dr. Patterson was crucial. But we cannot assume they'll stop. We need to move forward now. I set the folder down and slid the new notes across to him, the account of the APS visit, the threats from David, the message on my phone. He read carefully, nodding. This is escalation, and we can use it. I'll be filing for an injunction to keep them from approaching your home. In addition, we need to bring this to the attention of the probate court to make sure there are no surprises with your estate or your deed. I asked him how long this process might take. He leaned back, folding his hands. Weeks, possibly months. But the more evidence we have, the stronger your position. The key is to stay consistent. Don't rise to provocation. Let them make mistakes. Leaving his office, I felt both heavier and steadier. The road ahead was long, but there was a path. That afternoon, I drove to the small diner on Main Street. Nora refilled my coffee before I could ask. You look like a man with a lot on his shoulders, Robert, she said. I gave a half smile. More than usual, Nora, but I'll carry it. As I ate, I caught sight of Emily through the window. She was standing across the street with David, their heads close together, watching me. For a moment, I froze, fork in midair. Then I set it down and looked back at them, letting them see I was not afraid. They turned away quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Back home, Rose stopped by again, holding an envelope. I thought you should see this, she said. It was a notice she found taped to her mailbox by mistake. It was addressed to me. Inside was a flyer for a senior care facility with my name handwritten in the margin. My stomach tightened. They were getting bold enough to leave evidence in the open. I thanked her, slipped the paper into my folder, and promised to keep her updated. She touched my arm and told me to be careful. That evening, the phone rang once more. Emily's voice came sharp, stripped of sweetness. Dad, we know you're talking to lawyers. This is your last chance to do this the easy way. My grip on the phone tightened. Emily, I gave you everything I had. I sacrificed for you in ways you'll never understand. And now you're threatening me in my own home. I won't stand for it. Her breath came fast through the line. "You'll regret this." Then she hung up. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the silent receiver. My hands shook not from fear, but from the force of everything I had held inside for years. I went to the living room, sat in the chair by the window, and opened the folder again. The evidence was piling higher, each piece a brick in the wall between us. It hurt to know my daughter had built that wall herself. As the night settled in, I heard the maple tree outside groan under the wind. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and turned off the lights. The house hummed quietly around me, the same hum that had held me safe for decades. I sat back down at the table, the folder in front of me, and let the stillness sink in. Every betrayal was recorded now, every attempt to erase me cataloged and dated. And as I sat there in the dim glow of the lamp, I knew I was ready for the next move, whatever form it came in. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse with my satchel on the seat beside me. The January sky was pale, the air biting through my coat as I walked up the wide stone steps. Inside, the halls smelled of paper and floor polish, the hum of voices echoing off marble walls. I found Mr. Marford already waiting outside the probate clerk's office, his tie straight, his briefcase in hand. "Robert," he said, "today we file. This will put your daughter and David on notice that any attempt to claim your property will meet resistance." We sat across from the clerk while Ford laid out the evidence. He spoke calmly, pointing to the forged authorization, the draft transfer forms, the medical report, marked with lies. The clerk raised her eyebrows more than once. By the time the signatures were stamped and recorded, I felt as though a weight had shifted from my shoulders. My house was not fully safe yet, but it had a shield around it now. Leaving the courthouse, Ford walked with me to the sidewalk. "They may respond quickly," he said. "Expect anger, maybe another attempt to intimidate you. Keep your doors locked and your folder close." I drove home through steady traffic, gripping the wheel until my fingers ached. When I pulled into my driveway, a white envelope was wedged in my screen door. Inside was a single page with bold black letters. "You can't win. Give up now." I stood there on the porch, the paper trembling in my hands. My gut told me David had written it. I tucked it into the folder with the rest of the evidence and locked the door behind me. That afternoon, Rose stopped by again with a basket of muffins. I showed her the note. She read it face tight with anger. "Robert, this has gone too far. I can testify to what I've seen, and now with this, they've left fingerprints of their cruelty." Her faith in me steadied my breathing. We sat at the table eating muffins, talking about ordinary things for a while, the weather, the old maple tree, her grandchildren's school play. The normalcy felt like air after being underwater too long. As evening came, I stood at the window and saw headlights pause outside. David's truck idled for a moment before moving on. I watched until the taillights vanished, then drew the curtains shut. The phone rang not long after. Emily's voice was cold flat. "Dad, what are you trying to prove? You went to a lawyer, you went to the court. You're embarrassing yourself." I kept my tone calm. "Emily, I am protecting what I built. I am protecting myself." She let out a harsh laugh. "You think a few papers will stop us? You think anyone will believe an old man over his own daughter?" Her words stung, but I answered evenly. "The truth will speak louder than your lies." She slammed the line dead. I set the phone down and sat in the silence. Later that night, I opened the folder once more. The stack of papers had grown thick, each one a record of betrayal. Each one a stone in the wall of defense I was building. I touched the report from Dr. Patterson, the affidavits from Ford, the notes from Rose, and now the threatening letter. The wind rattled the windows, and the house settled around me with its familiar creaks. I leaned back in my chair, the lamplight spilling across the table, and listened to the steady tick of the mantel clock. The fight was tightening around me, but the flame inside had not dimmed. It burned steadier now, waiting for the moment I would need it most. The following week began with a phone call from Mr. Ford's office. Claire's voice carried urgency. "Robert, we've just received notice. Your daughter and her husband filed a petition claiming you are no longer competent to manage your affairs. A hearing has been scheduled." My grip on the receiver tightened. "When next Tuesday morning, Franklin County Court. Mr. Ford wants you to come in tomorrow to prepare." I thanked her, set the phone down, and stared at the quiet kitchen. They had finally made their move, bold and open. The plan that had been whispered in audio messages and scribbled on forged documents was now on paper with a court seal. That night, I barely slept. I walked the halls of the house, touching the photographs of Emily through the years, wondering how the little girl with the red shoes had grown into a woman willing to drag her father into court. The ache in my chest was deep, but beneath it was something harder. They wanted a fight, and now they would get one. The next morning, I drove downtown to Ford's office. He had a stack of files ready, his glasses perched low on his nose. "Robert," he said, "this is what we expected. They are claiming diminished capacity. They'll bring in so-called evaluations, maybe even witnesses. But we have stronger evidence. Dr. Patterson's report is airtight. Your financial records show clarity. And we have testimony from Rose." He leaned forward. "When you speak in that courtroom, keep your answers simple, steady, and honest. Let your characters show. The judge will see through their scheme." I nodded, though my throat was tight. That afternoon, I stopped at Rose's house. She was already waiting with a folder in her hands. Inside were her written statements about the night she overheard Emily and David and about the flyer misdelivered to her mailbox. "Robert, I'll stand by you," she said firmly. "They won't twist this without me speaking up." I felt gratitude so sharp it nearly knocked me over. The days crawled until Tuesday. That morning, I dressed carefully, choosing my best jacket-polished shoes and the blue tie Emily had given me for her college graduation. I tucked the folder into my satchel and drove downtown through icy streets. The courthouse steps felt steeper than before. Inside the courtroom, the air smelled of dust and polish, the benches filled with strangers waiting for their own cases. Emily and David sat at the opposite table with a lawyer I didn't recognize. Emily avoided my eyes, but David smirked openly. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the session to order. Emily's lawyer began painting a picture of an aging man slipping into confusion at risk of mismanaging his property. He spoke of concern of love, of the need to protect me from myself. Emily dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as he spoke. When it was my turn, Mr. Ford rose calmly. He presented Dr. Patterson's report, the affidavits, the forged documents, and the threatening letter. He called Rose to the stand, and her voice carried steady through the room as she described what she overheard the plotting in the dark outside her window. Finally, the judge asked me to speak. I stood, hands gripping the railing, and let my voice find its way out. I told the court about my years raising Emily alone, about the sacrifices, the double shifts, the loans to pay her tuition, the wedding I helped fund. I said I was not a perfect man, but I was not incompetent. And I would not be erased from the life I had built. The courtroom was silent when I finished. The judge studied me, then turned to Emily. Her face was pale, her eyes darting to David. "We will review all evidence before issuing a ruling," the judge said. "Until then, no transfer of authority will be granted." Relief flooded me, though the fight was not finished. I gathered my papers, walked past Emily without a word, and stepped into the cold sunlight outside. The air stung my cheeks, but for the first time in weeks, I felt taller, as if my back had straightened under the weight of truth. The battle was still raging, but I had not fallen, and that mattered more than anything else. When I got back home that afternoon, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves had witnessed what had just happened in that courtroom. I walked through each room slowly, touching the backs of chairs, the worn wood of the banister. The photographs lined along the hallway. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel hunted. I felt grounded. The papers in my satchel were not just evidence anymore. They were proof that the truth had stood up under fire. 2 days later, Mr. Ford called me with the news. The judge had issued her ruling. The petition was denied in full. Emily and David had no authority over me, no right to touch my accounts, no path to claim the house. The judge even referred the forged signatures to the prosecutor's office for review. Ford's voice carried a quiet satisfaction as he told me, "Robert, they underestimated you. And they underestimated the strength of the life you built." I sat at the kitchen table after the call, staring at the grain in the wood. Relief came like a wave followed by exhaustion so deep, it felt like it came from the bones. For a long time, I simply breathed, letting the silence fill me. That evening, Rose stopped by with a plate of cornbread. When I told her the ruling, her eyes lit up. "Robert, I knew the truth would hold." She squeezed my hand hard, and for the first time in months, I felt the corners of my mouth lift into something like a real smile. The next day, David's truck slowed in front of my house, but did not stop. I stood at the window and watched it pass the brake lights, flashing once before disappearing. They would not come back. Not after this. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild my routine. I mended the loose railing on the porch, cleared the leaves that had collected under the maple tree, and even dug out an old recipe book to make chili the way I used to when Emily was small. Each task was simple, but each reminded me that this was my home, my life, and I was still in control. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the photo of Emily at her college graduation. Her smile in that picture was wide and proud, her hand gripping mine. My chest ached as I looked at it, but I did not take it down. I realized I could hold both truths at once: the love I had for the girl she once was, and the betrayal of the woman she had become. Weeks passed, and spring came slowly to Columbus. The air softened, the snow melted from the gutters, and daffodils pushed through the soil by the walkway. Life did what it always does. It went on. One Saturday morning, I drove out to the diner. Nora poured my coffee without asking and said I looked taller than the last time she saw me. Maybe I did. Maybe carrying the truth upright has a way of straightening a man's back. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun went down the house behind me, warm with the hum of the furnace. The maple tree swayed gently in the evening breeze, and the street lay quiet. I thought about everything that had happened, the fight that had nearly taken me down, and the strange peace that had come after. I knew scars would remain. Family betrayals leave marks deeper than any blade. But I also knew I had done what needed to be done. I had defended the life I built, the home that carried my memories, and the dignity that no one had the right to strip away. The stars came out one by one as I sat there, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at rest. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, share your thoughts in the comments, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. These stories matter because they remind us that even in betrayal and heartbreak, truth and strength can carry us through.